The European View Podcast. Your place to navigate the insights of our policy journal, brought to you by the Martens Centre. With Sara Pini.
Hello, and welcome to the European View Podcast, your way to navigate through the main issues of our policy journal with valuable insights from the authors themselves. I'm Sara Pini, Senior Research Officer at the Martens Centre, and in today's episode, we will be diving into a topic that is even hotter today than it was when the article was written back in September. Here with me is Garvan Walshe, Research Associate at the Martens Centre, founder of the political AI startup Intelligence for Democrats, and chair of the NGO Unhacked Democracy, to speak about the article that he published in the latest issue of the European View, titled The Beowulf Group Taking the Lead to Defend Europe. You can find this and all the other articles of the European View on our website, martenscentre.eu. So, Garvan, welcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, first of all, can you explain the title of your article for those who are listeners who are maybe not that familiar with the Anglo-Saxon medieval epic poetry?
So Beowulf was a hero, and he was the hero of his village because the village had been preyed upon by an aggressive monster called Grendel. And Grendel would come and lay waste to the village, and the villagers would keep trying to pay it off, and they'd keep losing, and they'd keep trying to pay it off, and it wouldn't work. Finally, Beowulf decided he was going to be the one who would fight the monster. And he did, and he fought it, and he defeated it. Then he had to defeat the monster's mother. And it's a useful analogy for taking the initiative to actually defend what you value and what you care for by military force when it's necessary. It shows the folly of just trying to depend on other people or trying to buy independence by financial means, because in fact it just encourages the monsters to come back for more.
Can you just use the crocodile metaphor that you use in the article that I loved?
The crocodile metaphor, you're on a boat and there's a crocodile coming after you, and you just keep throwing stakes at the crocodile. And the idea is that you hope for the crocodile to be tired and eat too much and then go back and be happy and satisfied with its steak. But on the other hand, the crocodile might just think you're a really good source of steaks and keep following you and keep running after you and demanding more and more and more.
Yeah, we should be aware of this when treating with some particular crocodile, let's say. So basically, the premise on which you base your proposal for this Beowulf group applied to European defense is that there are differences in strategic cultures among European countries, and these influence their different perception of the threat, and so also the decision they take to confront the threat and the level of preparedness to confront it. So which countries in Europe do you think are the most prepared to face the most challenging threat, which is the Russian threat, and why?
Yeah, the strategic cultures are different, but so is the perception of the threat, and they're not necessarily directly related. So you might have a country that has a strategic culture that is quite active and martial, but is relatively distant from the threat. You might have another country that has a more pacific kind of strategic culture, sees itself as a small country, but is actually quite close to the threat. They're different. They're different in various ways. We might say that France is the more martial country that's further away and less immediately threatened, whereas Hungary is closer and more threatened, but has a very different strategic culture, a very anti-militaristic culture, and is quite afraid of Russia, so seeks to appease them. So you have those differences, even though there's been a lot of opinion research done, and it seems that the willingness to actually endorse defense policy outcomes tends to be related not so much to strategic culture, but more to perception of the threat. It's a pretty linear relationship going from east to west across Europe. Where strategic culture matters is what you actually do to deal with the problem in an operational sense or in a cultural sense. How willing are you to use force, not just build it up? How willing are you to pursue different types of military operations, prepare the population for national defense or for war? And in this piece, I argue that while it's great to have lots of initiatives that try and bring Europe together, it's also important for certain countries to take the lead, certain countries that have stronger military traditions, greater value in military excellence, to be able to take the lead and to develop a core of expertise and skill and culture, military culture and military doctrine that is then able to confront these threats. The other countries won't necessarily be willing to participate in this culture-shaping enterprise, but they will be willing to follow the lead of these countries if a threat does materialize.
So what would be concretely on the agenda of this coalition of the willing?
In the piece, I suggested a number of things. I mean, one was to have a strategic college for these countries that looked at how we'd updated our military doctrine to deal with this new threat. I think I phrased it when, if the United States might have been busy, I was more diplomatic. I didn't write it with the idea that the Trump administration might side with Russia and the United Nations at the front of my head. But even had this not happened, there was still a scenario in which the United States would have been busy in Asia, and therefore Europe would have to do things on its own. And one of the big questions facing us now is, how do we fight without the Americans? We've been spending 30 or 40 years operating under the assumption that if there was a major threat or an invasion by Russia, we would have large numbers of American troops available, but more importantly, American strategic enablers, American air defense, American industry, and American command and control to help prosecute the mission. How do we fight in the absence of that American contribution is probably now the most important question for defense planning in European capitals today. What do we do with the aircraft we have, the radar systems we have, the logistics we have, and the air defense we have, compared to what we would have done had the Americans been involved? There's quite clearly a very great difference between the way Ukraine has had to fight Russia and the way NATO war plans would have envisaged fighting Russia. This has a lot to do with the history of World War II and the way armies have developed, but Western militaries tend to put their firepower in their air force, whereas Soviet militaries tend to put their firepower in their artillery. Russia mostly uses its artillery for firepower. Ukraine, which is transitioning into a NATO model from a Soviet model, had yet to build up a properly advanced air force, still relies very heavily on artillery. Finland perhaps has both. I mean, it has the most powerful artillery in Europe, despite being a country of 5 million people, but also has an increasingly advanced air force using the more advanced American aircraft, the F-A-18s, the F-35s. Now, we would still be able to use those in the event of a disengaged United States. In all likelihood, the question would then be, how long can we maintain that capability, whether new orders would be forthcoming, how you deal with spare parts, and so forth, in a really worst case scenario where the Americans said, you know what, we're completely out of this. If the Americans behave towards us in the way that Germany was behaving towards Ukraine, and only slowly and grudgingly releasing equipment, we need to have contingency plans to deal with that. And the kind of strategic college that I proposed would be a place where this kind of thinking can occur. The second thing I really talked about was the idea of an elite reserve. There's an increasing discussion about conscription in Europe, but this is something separate to that. This is about finding ways for highly educated, motivated people to contribute to the defense of their country in ways where their specialism is rewarded, and to do it on a pan-European level. The British Army, for example, has units like the I think it's called the 700 Corps or the Honourable Artillery Company, which the joke they have is it's neither honourable nor artillery nor a company, because it's actually a reserve unit of people who work in the City of London, often with highly advanced skills, operating at quite an elite level, but are otherwise, bankers or lawyers. But then they have this military side to them too. And it's a way to allow people, nevertheless, with high pressure jobs, to still contribute to the national defense. And I argue that we should think about having that as a more European model, and it could be a joint force. It could be administered, for example, by Britain, France, Poland, and Sweden, and people could rotate into different things, learn each other's cultures, learn how to work together with similar reservists elsewhere, and this joint elite reserve force would then be on hand in the event of a major crisis.
So you kind of already answered to my following question, but I want to go a bit deeper. You wrote this article, as I said, in September, so before the US elections, and issues that you raised were already topical. I mean, whatever would have been the result of the US election. But you hint here and there in the article that would Trump be reelected, that would change things radically. But did you expect that it would be that radical?
I expected the US to start thinking about withdrawing from Europe. I expected also them to try and engage in a lot of sort of ordinary, quite Trumpist domestic policy. So I thought they would try and cut democracy programs, for example. I didn't think they would cut the democracy programs illegally by just shutting off the money. I thought they'd have a normal budget process and just not renew the funding. So I've been surprised by the speed and sort of revolutionary intensity with which the Trump administration has been working, but not necessarily the outcome. I think it was pretty clear that he was going to withdraw from Europe. He's not interested in the rest of the world. He wants a kind of fortress America, if he even thinks that far. He might like to do deals with great powers, but even then, he doesn't seem to be pursuing, an attempt to get concessions from Russia. He just seems to be folding. And it was certainly the case in the first Trump administration that he was more interested in the appearance of a deal than the substance of a deal. He wants to be seen to be a deal maker, a peacemaker, but he doesn't really care about what actually goes on in the detail. He wants the photo op, not the substance. And this is also how he's done business with people. So his hotels are famously very glitzy, but then the quality of everything is a bit rubbish.
Okay, so what you propose in your article is mainly for the long term. It would take years to actually realize, but things have precipitated now. So we need immediate action to ensure the security of our continent. And you propose 10 such immediate measures in an article that you recently published in Foreign Policy. Can you briefly present them?
Well, the idea of this is what can we do now and what we really need to do now. And the most important thing, the first thing is a change of attitude, really. We need to understand that winning this battle is the most important thing we can do. And we'll need to sacrifice some other potential situations in order to win this battle. Some of the other measures I talk about are around defense production. So how do we increase production of artillery? Ukraine's two biggest needs at the moment are for artillery shells and air defense ammunition. And this can be done especially through the Ukrainian defense industry that is operating very efficiently, but not operating at full capacity because it needs more money. And Ukraine can't just simply print the money, because then that would lead to hyperinflation, which is something we want to cause to Russia, not to have in our own ally. And then the question is, where can that money come from? There are two very useful sources of that money. One is the frozen assets in European banks. There are at least 150 billion, perhaps up to 280 billion in European banks of frozen Russian state assets. In international law, these belong to Ukraine because Russia owes Ukraine reparations for the damage it's caused through its war of aggression that far exceed 300 billion. They may go up, up into the trillions of damage that Russia has caused through this war. So that money should be seized. It would be legal to seize it and give it to Ukraine in compensation. And then that money can be used to build more weapons, build more ammunition, both from Ukrainian factories and also in European factories outside Ukraine that are a bit more protected from Russian attack. The second source of money is the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund. Because the war has led to an increase in oil prices, it's also led to this oil fund making extra profits, at least, 100 billion. And that money could also be used to rapidly increase defense production and to give defense suppliers the security they need to understand that they can invest in large-scale new factories. The UK built a very small artillery factory in Sheffield, I think last year, but it was only £25 million worth of artillery investment, which is really a very small amount of money. We're talking about tens or hundreds of millions, even billions that might be needed to fund the new demand for ammunition, both for Ukraine and also to replenish our own stocks, because we haven't got the stockpiles needed for a full-scale war, and we need to develop those stockpiles if we're going to deter a Russian attack in the future.
Okay, now let's go back to the European View article, because you said that this Beowulf group should be open to all European countries, but that some countries are simply not ready yet because their strategic culture have not sufficiently evolved. Even if you say that in some cases like France, you can already see starting to evolve. And of course, it takes considerable time for mentalities to change. But what could accelerate this evolution?
I mean, setting up this, the strategic college would help. Then people from other countries could go to it, they could learn about it. But I think it's important that it's done with a sense of what peace through strength strategic culture would involve. And that's why I suggested it initially be led by France, the UK, and Poland, perhaps with significant Nordic involvement as well. Now the Nordic Baltic 8 is increasingly acting as a unit, so perhaps we could have a four-way leadership with the Nordic Baltic 8 as a bloc, with Poland, with the United Kingdom and France. That would be a good way to get the ball rolling. Then people from other countries like Italy or Germany or Spain, where there's some interest but not that kind of strategic cultural shift, could also join. Perhaps also countries like Romania or Bulgaria, where there's a lot of nervousness about the threat from Russia, but not necessarily the same depth of military modernization that we've seen in Northeast Europe, could also start becoming involved. And gradually you can spread the strategic culture further.
Okay, but it will take time.
This will, of course, take time, but it was never intended as an instant result. And obviously, things have changed since I wrote the article. Now we're dealing with what are the really quick things that need to be done. And the two quick things are this question of how we get production of ammunition up. And the second big thing is how we get war plans ready to fight without the United States. And there are other things that we need to think about. What do we learn from Ukraine's very important experience actually fighting Russia, its use of drones, both in land warfare and in naval warfare? Are we able to take advantage of that experience in our planning? I mean, it's one of the other things that we seem to have learned from the war is that if in the old days Russia's size was an advantage, it was very hard to actually invade Russia because you'd have to go thousands and thousands of kilometers inside. And as you know, both Napoleon and Hitler found out, that was pretty difficult. Now it's a disadvantage because it's very hard to mount effective air defense of Russia because things are so dispersed. You need an awful lot more air defense capability to defend something, whereas Europe, fortunately, is relatively physically concentrated. So our air defense facilities can be much more compact and much more efficient than the Russian ones can be. And we're in a phase of warfare where aerial activity is much more important than it used to be, where it's really a three-dimensional battle space now. And you, from drones, from loitering munitions, from long-range strike capabilities of various kinds, we really are completely in this third dimension. And that's one of the most, they sometimes call it the transparent battlefield because you can see everything. It's very hard. You can't hide under cover. You can't, unless you're literally underground. You can't hide behind trees because the drones will come and see you.
Thank you, Garvan, for this really interesting and very topical conversation. And for those listening in, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and discover all the interesting insights of the European view on our website, martenscentre.eu, and on all our social media channels. Thank you, and stay tuned for more.
This was the European View podcast, your place to navigate the insights of our policy journal. Follow the Martens Centre for more.